Firstly, apologies for that last video on how to overtone sing. It covered the basics of sustaining a steady tone, moving through the vowel spectrum. It was just so formal. I couldn't even watch it back again, but I think it was probably terrible. Who can stand to see themselves and hear themselves stuck in that form forever? For this lifetime, for all I'm aware of, that's me. Such a difficult thing to accept, and yet it's not me. It's just an automaton reacting. But there's something else that can do a little work, something else above all of that, and I'm hoping that that's what we'll get to today as we explore the style of Khoomei. Khoomei. We kind of ended with that mouth position at the previous video, a very important mouth position because it represents the mouth position for the mother style of throat singing in Central Asia, which I pronounce Khoomei. I've heard it called Khoomei and other pronunciations as well, depending on where in Central Asia you hear it, but it's all over. It's not just in Tuva or Mongolia. Think of whistling. A lot of people can't whistle. They say that and they will have a hard time singing Khoomei. Khoomei is a subtle style. It is not flashy. The harmonic will not spike out and impress strangers at parties. It's not supposed to be impressive. It's supposed to be communicative. With Khoomei, you go out into nature perhaps, listen, sing, and respond, but above all focus on the whole sound, not just the harmonic that sticks out above the drone. There's a whole sound made up of many different tones, a whole family of tones within it that must be appreciated and enjoyed and exploited for its possible musical expression. There's a story that can be told inside of that sound, and that's what music is, a story in sound that doesn't mean anything at all other than it seems like a story. Thinking of whistling, the lips become pursed in a kind of embouchure. The tongue lays somewhat flat on the bottom of the oral cavity. It's not curling up to touch the top palate. That'll be the next style we do. This is Khoomei, where the tongue is free and floating. Tip, sometimes touching the back of the bottom teeth, and sometimes, depending on your physiology, the back of the bottom lip. But if you can conceive of the sensation of whistling, if that's an experience you have in your automaton's memory, then you may be able to approximate the sensation of singing Khoomei. Also, you can approximate it by using a jaw harp, which has the exact same movements to change the overtones in the jaw harp as there is when we're singing. But it's the same with whistling as well. So another important feature of getting this set up for Khoomei is the jaw position. Not everyone's jaw aligns in the exact same way, but most of the time for Khoomei, the jaw is aligned at top and bottom. So the top teeth line up with the bottom teeth and sometimes even extend forward, jutting forth to make just a little bit more room, to make a large, cavernous, big space inside the mouth. You'll notice that when we form an embouchure, we tense at the corners here, while kind of smiling, while simultaneously puckering to form that. And you'll notice I can control the aperture of my embouchure. Small to big. By opening the embouchure to that size, we get close to that Khoomei Bourbonador, or Baerlang style, as some call that holy grail style, where the lips seem to tremble subconsciously. So there is some extraneous manipulation of the oral cavity, jutting the jaw, in order to make more space than is normally there. So when we have that position, one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to focus on ah vowels and oo vowels, but we want hui, e at the root of the tongue. Almost every language in the world is going to get lazy, and depending on what your first language was, you will be lazy with these e vowels. Even the French will be lazy with their oui vowels because they're not arching their tongue enough to get the higher harmonics. Here's my tongue in a low arch formation with the vowel O while I'm doing the Khoomei mouth position. You can do it with me. With the natural voice, no throat tension at all. So te so mi. And it isn't until I arch the tongue towards that position of E that you hear the rising high harmonic ascending above the tone. So keeping the arch in that tongue is very important. I'll do it again with the high arch in the tongue. You'll hear the higher harmonics coming out, and that is what you must focus on, is getting those higher ones. Everyone I've ever met and doing a lesson with, they just don't have that arch high enough at first. So it is a habit that must be undone. A habit of keeping the lips pursed simultaneously while arching the root of the tongue. Hui, hui. With the natural voice. You can start to hear the mi, re, do. Very important to find the home position of Khoomei. Otherwise you're lost in the overtone series, one half of which is all steppy and the other half of which is all leapy. You want to be in the center with mi, re, do, re, mi. And finding that position and memorizing with your body where that is. And it takes time to memorize where that is with your body. You can't force it into position. You have to do it enough so that finally it begins to remember. And it doesn't take all that long if you get out of your own way trying to make your harmonic higher and instead focus on listening for the sound that is already there. Some of you may not hear this at all. It doesn't mean you're overtone deaf. It just means you haven't reoriented your oral focus inside a sound. But it will happen. It is possible. You must hear the melody inside the continuous sound, the moving of the melody within the family of tones. And you can see how far forward the tip of my tongue is to the back of my bottom lip. Now your physiology might be different. Your tongue may not meet that point. It may have to be at the back of your bottom teeth. I don't know. I can't see that. And you have to figure that out for yourself. But the sign will be the sound. The sound that you get will be the sign that it is working. And that is how any refinement of these singing styles occurs, is you have to be your own teacher, and you have to be responsive enough to be a good teacher, to be able to listen, to get yourself out of the way for long enough, rather than trying to make a louder, higher, more prominent harmonic, is trying to listen for the harmonic that is already present in there and allowing it to be louder. Finding the home position with the Khoomei mouth position, like whistling. Feeling the tongue move to change the overtones. Tip of the tongue getting closer to the back of the teeth to make the overtones rise. Arch of the tongue, ui, ui, going towards E to make the overtones rise. Tip of the tongue pulling away to make the overtones step lower. Arch of the tongue descending flatter, but always a sensation of roundedness. Ooh, ooh. So how to create this guttural tone in the throat to make the overtones more prominent? This guttural voice, this Khoomei voice, filters out many of the family members in the continuous tone. In that one tone you're sustaining, there's all of those harmonics. And by making the sound, the guttural, you're kind of turning down the volume of many of the family members of the tone so that the very high members of the family can stand out for a change and be heard, those ones that create the melody. Do, re, mi, so, mi, re, like so. It is a danger to use some of these throat tension techniques. Up until now, I've only given lessons to people in person to make sure they don't hurt themselves when trying to do the technique, but I have since abandoned that caution and said, in life, if we do not have danger and we have too much protection, we are not really living at all. And I can't think of a more appropriate time than now to start living. And living in danger if you have to, because it is now the time to explore the extremes. There's very little to lose. And too much protection, too much safety isn't living at all. That's just sustaining comfort until death. So now I'll show you a safe and effective, least effort means of learning to produce the Khoomei and Kargira voice. The Khoomei voice sounds like this. The Kargira voice sounds like this. Big difference in the way they sound and in the sensation of creating them. To begin to produce this Khoomei voice that goes with the Khoomei mouth position and other mouth positions I'll show you, you have to first produce a whisper, almost like you're fogging up a mirror. And feel the sensation. Does it push up? Does it push down? Is it like a circle closing? What is the sensation for you of making an airy whisper like the ocean? For me, it sounds like a tensing together and up, an upward push. And from this simple tension, which I'm supporting with a well-sustained breath, and I expire fully before I take in my in-breath, and I'm contracting the muscles of my abdomen and all the side muscles and muscles around the back to a certain degree, to create this whisper like so. Now I want to be able to have control of the whisper, and that is the control of the dynamic level, how quiet or loud you can make it. And if you can't make the dynamic level of the hiss quiet to loud, then you do not yet have control of the airstream and the tension of those muscles. So practice it just with the hiss at first, like so, trying to go from very quiet, a whisper, to somewhat loud, back to a whisper again. Here it comes. The movement of waves. Again, almost imperceptible at first. Expiring the old air first before I take in the new air. Squeeze out the full breath to take in a full one. I'm empty. The vacuum's created. Yes. Now, if you can't seem to have control of that loud and quiet breath, then you haven't yet developed the refinement of that musculature to control the airstream, which is kind of like a valve closing on and off. And this can reduce the amount of air that is leaving the lungs through the contraction of the muscles in the larynx, the pushing together of the vocal folds, coming together and pushing up, the things that vibrate in your throat, to release less air at a reduced rate, giving the illusion that the breath can be sustained for a very long time, which it is. Not circular breathing. It is not possible vocally. It is possible to inhale and exhale a tone, but it is not possible to sustain a tone endlessly on one continuous expiration. But it is possible to prolong it if you can squeeze the valve of the throat and produce the hiss like so. Now, as you do that, you want to start to begin to allow a gurgle, a groan, a moan, something ugly, It doesn't have to be a beautiful sound all the time, as the pop shows tell us what is a beautiful sound. Well, let any sound come out of you, be it a groan, be it a moan, be it a gurgle or a curl or a pop, but make sure it's quiet at first and let it emerge from that hiss slowly and quietly as possible, so you can learn the least effort method of producing the Khoomei voice, which leads to the Kagura voice. Again, Khoomei voice is oh, Kagura voice is oh, but you can't get to oh until you first do oh somewhat comfortably. Many of you will skip into the Kagura voice, the oscillation of the false vocal folds that produces that very low, raspy, resonant subtone, impossibly low tone, and that's okay too. But we want to find the level of tension that occurs before that Kagura low tone. So I start to allow a groan to emerge from my hiss, expiring fully before inspiring, getting the old air out. So easy to breathe in when you expire, empty to fill. Just a little bit of vocalization coming out, all the while pushing together and up to create a tone that will most certainly tickle if you're doing it properly for the first time. A little more volume there, you can hear. And returning to the hiss. It's important not to put the tone down low in the chest, to swallow it like that. You can feel the flexion as if you're yawning down the back of the throat. It is not that deep down the back of the throat. It is a forward sensation. Just as though we're taking the hiss, the air, the ocean, and allowing it to vibrate at a frequency. And maybe it's just a groan at first. Maybe it's very ugly. And you can start to make the tone rise and fall if you're getting a sound like you're scanning all the possible frequencies you can produce vocally with this tension. And it is tension, there's no way to say it isn't. I'm just showing you the least effort, minimum amount of tension required to produce the sound quietly. If you can't do it quietly, you do not yet have the control. But practice doing it quietly. Some of you may slip into Kagura like so from doing your groan. And it may not be that refinedly tuned yet. It may just sound like a rattling chainsaw at the bottom of a well. But the goal is to try and get that interim tension between natural voice, throat voice, and gotta get it out voice, like that. And it comes from that hissy breath. So practice your hiss breath on groaning and making a continuous tone, and you may have to slide the tone until you find one that doesn't tickle too badly or hurt too much at first. And all the while making sure to get the old air out before taking new air in as you practice. And as you start to get that tone, which should be smoky and wide, with a large oral cavity, cavernous, you can listen to some of the singing of the great Howlin Wolf. Chester Burnett, his name was, who used this voice quite exclusively in all of his songs. To familiarize yourself with the timbre you're aiming for, and your timbre will be completely unique. It doesn't have to sound like mine or anyone else's, but it must sound like someone else's voice besides your own natural singing voice, otherwise you haven't found the Khoomei voice. And after you get that Khoomei voice, so smoky and round and full, you can begin to put together with the mouth position, like whistling up high. That's the timbre of the voice behind the Khoomei mouth position. Gather around me, birds, and worship me. We got some rain to contend with, a lovely natural force. The weather, it doesn't listen to any of our criticisms about its actions. It just does what it wants to do. Let's be more like the weather. The Valsalva Maneuver. When we push up against an immovable object, or try to give birth to a child, or even try to excrete waste from an anus, we are barreling down with this Valsalva maneuver that goes all the way up to the throat. You can pretend you're an angry Japanese anime character. Or if you've done any martial arts, you're getting very close to approximating the sensation of the Valsalva maneuver, which helps protect the torso for impacts and pressurization. And this sound, which is used so often in martial arts, is also used when producing this Khoomei voice we are so familiar with. So it's very important to have the right amount of air support when producing the voice. But you can imagine you're pushing against some immovable object, or trying to excrete waste or give birth. And they're all very similar sensations. And the reason why they create that sound when doing martial arts is because it concentrates the muscular energy of the body into one focal point and does increase the strength of whatever action is being performed. In this case, we're producing a vocal action of causing the vocal folds to oscillate at a frequency to produce a tone in a whole family of tones, and we're attempting to isolate certain harmonics within that tone to create a melodic story, a story in sound. So if you're not getting the smoky Khoomei tone from producing the whisper breath, you might want to consider a more vigorous attack. And believe me, it takes a lot of time and concentration to be able to produce this particular timbre. It is even more difficult than producing the Kagira tone, which may be turning on for some of you much more easily than that Khoomei was like that. And you may be barreling down too firmly, making too much effort to produce the sound, but it's little more than a subtle push up like so, as if I'm straining while vocalizing, and it is completely natural to produce a sensation of tickling. Some have told me the Valsalva maneuver lowers blood pressure. Others have told me it raises blood pressure. My blood pressure is higher than my weekly salary, so I don't know which it does or what causes it. But you can find out for yourself. Now with the Khoomei style, there's articulation we can perform. Articulations, I think of them as moving vortices. Some of these vortices, these little circular motions, move forward and some move backward. And the movements are mostly with the tongue. So how to make your harmonics more audible to the listener? One way is a kind of illusion in that we articulate to create the distinction between one harmonic to the next. It doesn't mean that my harmonic's any louder than yours. It just means that I'm distinguishing it through articulation. And I articulate by the subtle movement of a vowel sound. So from the Khoomei mouth position, you may need lots of space between your top and bottom teeth. You may have to drop your jaw quite a bit, but please don't do this if it hurts too badly. However, if you haven't experienced a lot of pain in your life, go for it. Experience that pain. There may be something great on the other side of it, as there often is on the other side of pain and suffering. I'm flicking my tongue forward. You, like saying you. But it is a micro movement of EU. When I say EU, The movement of speech is so gross and vast, it is nothing compared to the micro movements of overtone singing. These are subtle, millimeters, fractions of inches, whatever they might be, of movement that create subtle changes in the overtones. So this is micro movements. So one of the hardest things is getting used to these micro movements, much less gross than the movements of speech. And however, going back to the movements of speech and the sensation of speech is the best way to get yourself grounded again if you get lost in the meticulousness of these movements. So if I want to do the Khoomei voice, I remember the angry Japanese man. So with the articulations you're hearing, those are you, micro movements, mumbled movements, severe reductions, 10% of the natural movement of articulating you with the tongue. I can move without any flicking of the tongue, any whipping of the tongue, those articulations. But with the flicking, it creates an alternative style and also a means of emphasizing the harmonics position by deviating from it ever so slightly. So there are you. When we say you, the tip of the tongue starts from a forward position towards the back of the bottom teeth, the back of the bottom lip. You. Forward, back. There's the reverse position, the other articulation, the circle going the other direction. I feel this circle going that way. When I do the reverse, I feel the opposite direction of the circle, but that may be a unique sensation for you. What is that other vowel movement? And that is oui, like the French, oui. But again, it is a micro movement of that gross speech. So it is oui. And I'm coughing a little bit right now. Actually, I was tested positive for this COVID-19 virus and even recorded for the new Bill and Ted's Face the Music movie, which you'll hear my voice in, recorded solidly through the depth of this horrible disease, still singing through it all, Kargira and all. So there's you, and oui, reduced micro movements. Try and put one next to the other. See if you can do 3 or 4 we's paired with 3 or 4 you's, and then you get the two motions together, these two articulations that are performed in Khoomei. So forward or back to forward, you, forward to back, oui. That is tongue to forward of mouth to back, tongue from back of mouth to forward. Perhaps you can speed it up some. Now I'm also concentrating on the home position in Khoomei, and I know that position so well just from doing it for so many years. I'm looking for the mi, re, do, so area of the overtone series. In order to reach that area, you must arch the back of the tongue and produce the simultaneous oo or oo. And that is the only way you're going to reach some of the higher harmonics. Again, many of you may not be hearing the harmonics loudly because the arch of your tongue is too low. At the back of the throat, you're emphasizing the vowel ah or when we want e. And this will help produce the higher harmonic. And so this is another way of articulating. You can also articulate by simply opening and closing the aperture of the embouchure. Embouchure is the lip formation. See, I'm just opening and closing the mouth, and now again resorting to the simplicity of speech, which is gross yet simple enough to start us with a foundation. And you can combine ms with u and ou to create rhythm. This is one thing that is unique to Khoomei. You can create extraordinary rhythm, and when we create rhythm, in particular galloping rhythms, a rhythm that at all reflects the sound of horse, riding a horse, galloping of a horse, we're getting close to what in Tuva they call a Zenguler, which is the sound of a plinking of a stirrup. There's also another sensation you should be aware of, and that is we have the ability to direct how much sound resonates in the nose and how much sound resonates from the throat. And at the back of the throat, you have a velum and you have an epiglottis. And to approximate the movement of those parts of the oral cavity, you can simply go ong, long, 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 long. Ong, O-N-G. Ong, long, 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 long. And you should be able to peel open your ongs, your O-N-Gs. And that's opening the oral cavity to go from exclusively nasal resonance, ong, where no sound will come out because it's moving entirely through the nasal cavity, to entire mouth resonance, where it's only coming through the mouth. And you can hear many of the overtones coming out as I'm opening and closing that space at the back of the throat, moving towards nasal and oral resonance. You can hear some, it is an overtone singing style on its own by manipulating the velum and the epiglottis to create overtone popping. And there's a very clear nasal and oral resonance back and forth, but there's also a space between them. It isn't an on and an off, it's a continuum. So the amount of nasal resonance you direct in a sound is up to that part of the physiology. You do not want to be directing too much nasal resonance in Khoomei. Most of the traditional singers want it entirely out of the mouth. However, there are styles that use this oral and nasal resonance back and forth to create a style of its own. Everything that seems like a mistake or another possibility can be incorporated and used to create a style. So you can hear me moving back and forth between oral and nasal resonance, popping, if you will. So long, 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 you, long, 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 you, we, mum, 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 mum. So these are some of the techniques you can use to create stories and sound of your own that involve the articulation, you, tongue starting forward and coming back, we, tongue from the back going forward to whip. And then variations of that, combinations of that, forward, backward. The two things side by side can create contrasts of style. You can also use the rhythm effect of the epiglottis and velum, which is the long, 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 long. And so Khoomei is a great style for exploring rhythm, one that cannot always be exploited the same in Sigit, which is the next style we will explore. And I think that's all I have to say about Khoomei for now.